Hear this out. A footballer dropped £18.5 million on a haunted Italian palazzo with an actual body count. Another woman quietly bought multiple apartments in the single most expensive building on Earth, $123 million worth. These are just a few glimpses of how the black billionaires across Europe roll when it comes to luxurious residences. Let's count them down. Rank number 8. Strive Masiyiwa, the £24 million mansion with a library that costs more than your car. There's a detail buried in Strive Masiyiwa's London property that tells you everything about who he is and how he operates. And it has nothing to do with the square footage or the postcode or the number of bathrooms, although all of those are considerable. The book collection in his London mansion is valued at over $40,000. Not the house, just the books. And by his own account, the library is the most used room in the entire 24-room residence, where he spends his time studying business management and theology with the same intensity he brings to his board commitments at Netflix and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. For someone who grew up in Zimbabwe and had to fight the government of Robert Mugabe for years just to get a telecoms license before eventually founding Econet Group, the library isn't an eccentric detail. It's a monument to the thing that got him out. The London mansion itself is valued at £24 million, runs 24 rooms with 9 en-suite bathrooms, and serves as the operational base for Masiyiwa's Higher Life Foundation, which, led by his wife Tsitsi and daughter Elizabeth, has provided over 300,000 scholarships for African youth. So you're looking at a property that functions simultaneously as a private residence, a global foundation headquarters, and a personal research center. That's a lot of square footage working very hard. The portfolio extends beyond London into a Surrey countryside estate, valued between £2.5 and £3.3 million, which gives the family a quieter anchor point away from the density of the capital. The kind of rolling hills, private estate Surrey that people who can afford to decompress properly tend to gravitate toward. And then there's the New York dimension. A 29th floor penthouse at the El Dorado on the Upper West Side, valued at $24.5 million, which rounds out a 3-city residential strategy that tracks closely to where his board and philanthropic commitments actually take him. Masiyiwa became the first black billionaire to appear on the Sunday Times Rich list during his time in the UK, which is its own kind of landmark in a country with a complicated relationship to that kind of visibility. The £24 million London mansion is the center of gravity for all of it. And yes, the library might be the most important room in the building. Rank number 7. Ibrahim, the man who runs 2 cities simultaneously. Most people on this list built their wealth in one industry and one geography. Ibrahim built his in an industry that barely existed, in a continent that most Western investors weren't even looking at, and then used the proceeds to embed himself in 2 of the most strategically valuable addresses in all of Europe. Ibrahim is Sudanese-born, and the foundation of everything is Keltel International, the mobile communications company he built across Africa, at a time when the prevailing assumption was that Africans either didn't need or couldn't sustain mobile networks at scale. He proved that assumption spectacularly wrong, sold Keltel to MTC Kuwait for somewhere between $1.4 and $3.4 billion, and then spent the next decade channeling that capital into something with a longer time horizon than any telecom deal: the reformation of African governance itself, through the Ibrahim Foundation. The foundation needs a headquarters, and that headquarters is in Mayfair. His primary London residence, a 5-bedroom house shared with his wife Hania, is in the same postcode, which puts him in one of the few places on Earth where the cost per square foot regularly runs between £4,000 and £6,000. The Georgian and Regency architecture of Mayfair isn't just aesthetically significant, it's a signal. You don't maintain a 5-bedroom house in Mayfair because you need the space. You maintain it because the address puts you inside a very specific professional and social network. And for someone whose work runs through international diplomacy and African policy circles, that network is the whole point. Then there's Monaco, where Ibrahim keeps a suite and correspondence address at 12 Avenue des Spilug in Monte Carlo, a location that sits at the intersection of the Principality's financial and social world. Monaco isn't just a tax address for Ibrahim the way it is for some of the other names on this list. Its proximity to the international crisis group and the diplomatic circles that his foundation operates within constantly. What separates Ibrahim from almost every other entry on this list is that the properties aren't trophy purchases. They're functional infrastructure for a mission that's genuinely bigger than the real estate itself. The Mayfair house is a think tank as much as it is a home, and the Monaco address is a diplomatic satellite as much as it is a residence. For someone who spent his career building systems in places that others had written off, that's a very consistent philosophy applied to a very different asset class. Rank number 6. Mike Adenuga, Holland Park's most mysterious resident. Now here's a name that doesn't come up nearly enough in conversations about black billionaires in Europe, partly because Adenuga operates with a level of intentional discretion that makes most of the other people on this list look practically attention-seeking by comparison. Nigeria's second richest man, founder of Globacom and Conoil, and the owner of a Lagos estate in Banana Island that is genuinely the stuff of architectural legend. And yet in London, his presence is so carefully managed that most people in his own neighborhood probably couldn't tell you who lives at 167 Holland Park Avenue. Holland Park is worth understanding as a location choice because it says something specific about what Adenuga wants from his London base. This isn't Knightsbridge, which is visible and commercial and deliberately impressive. Holland Park is described by local real estate agents as the most expensive village in London, leafier, quieter, more residential, favored by tech founders and media figures who have the money to be loud and the taste to be silent. The massive white stucco villas that dominate the streetscape have a grandeur to them that doesn't require you to look at it, because it's just the baseline of the neighborhood. Many of the homes in this district have gone deep underground in every literal sense. The iceberg trend of subterranean extensions has been particularly pronounced here, with basements added for swimming pools, cinema rooms, and secure wine cellars that multiply the usable living space without changing the exterior profile of the building at all. You walk past and see a Georgian stucco facade. Underneath, there might be 3 floors of additional living space going straight down. That's the Holland Park philosophy: maximum luxury, minimum visibility. And that contrast, the public restraint against the private excess, maps perfectly onto Adenuga's whole operation. In Lagos, he has 9 duplexes, a private heliport, and a profile that makes anonymity basically impossible. In London, he has a correspondence address in Holland Park and a level of anonymity that is, for a man of his wealth, essentially priceless. The London base isn't a display. It's a secure node in a global financial network that doesn't need to be seen to be working. For a man who built a 100 billion naira empire by being very good at staying several steps ahead of the people watching him, that makes complete sense. Rank number 5. Femi Otedola, the all-white duplex directly opposite Harrods. If Adenuga is the billionaire who disappears into his neighborhood, Femi Otedola is the billionaire whose neighborhood is itself the statement. Because there is nothing subtle about buying an £18.6 million duplex directly opposite Harrods in Knightsbridge and then decorating the entire interior in white. Otedola, energy magnate, former chairman of Fort Oil, and current force behind Geregu Power, has made white his aesthetic signature across everything he touches. His yacht is white. His car collection leans white. And his Knightsbridge flat, by all available accounts, is a masterclass in the kind of minimalism that costs an enormous amount of money to achieve and maintain. The duplex sits in a location where a single square foot costs upwards of £6,000, directly opposite one of the most famous retail destinations on Earth, which means your view from the living room is, essentially, Harrods. What's interesting about this purchase as a real estate decision is what Otedola moved away from to get here. He previously owned 2 mansions on the Bishop's Avenue in North London, the road nicknamed Billionaires Row, valued together at around £24 million. The Bishop's Avenue is old money, suburban scale, big garden luxury that operates on a different logic than Knightsbridge. Moving from 2 mansions on Billionaires Row into a single city center duplex isn't a downsize. It's a philosophy change. It says, I don't want the estate and the driveway and the perimeter wall. I want to be in the middle of everything, immediately. That shift reflects something broader about where the most mobile tier of global billionaires are moving, away from static, isolated compounds and towards centrally located, high-amenity urban properties that plug directly into the commercial and social infrastructure around them. The Knightsbridge duplex is not a retreat. It's a forward operating base. Beyond London, Otedola maintains residences in Monaco, Dubai, and New York. The latter specifically so that his daughters, DJ Cuppy and Temi, can maintain their own creative and fashion careers with a proper base in the city. The $12 million yacht named Nana, the private jets for continental commutes, the Dubai property described as a world wonder, all of it feeds into a lifestyle that the all-white Knightsbridge flat sits at the center of, like the gallery where the whole collection comes to rest. Rank number 4. Samuel Eto'o, the cursed Italian palazzo that nobody else would buy. Okay, we need to pause here for a second, because this next entry is genuinely one of the wildest real estate stories on this entire list, and it involves a footballer, a dead Egyptian pharaoh, a countess who fell off a cliff, and one of the most beautiful buildings on the Italian Riviera. Samuel Eto'o, former Barcelona and Chelsea striker, 3-time African Footballer of the Year, one of the most decorated players of his generation, reportedly purchased Villa Alta in Portofino, Italy, for £18.5 million in 2015. And on the surface, it sounds like a perfectly logical decision. Portofino is one of the most exclusive villages in Europe, the kind of place that gets described as a living postcard, where the pastel-colored buildings on the harbor look too good to be real, and the only people who live there year-round are the kind of people who don't need to be anywhere else. A 40-room Victorian stone palazzo on 30,000 square meters of clifftop estate overlooking the Mediterranean, with interiors historically designed by Renzo Mongiardino. The theatrical, layered aesthetic of a man considered one of the great decorators of the 20th century. Sounds incredible. Where's the problem? The problem is that this villa was the summer home of the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, the man who funded the expedition that opened Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. He died shortly after from an infected mosquito bite, which is either a remarkable coincidence or, depending on who you ask, the beginning of a very bad run of luck attached to this specific piece of real estate. His nephew died in the villa after falling down the stairs. And then, in 2001, the countess, who owned the property at the time, vanished from the cliffside. Her body eventually washed up in Saint-Tropez. Eto'o was reportedly amused by the cursed angle when it came up in the press, which is either exactly the right attitude or a very brave one. The restoration budget alone was estimated at around €3 million on top of the purchase price, because a 40-room Victorian palazzo on a Mediterranean cliff requires the kind of ongoing maintenance that makes the initial price tag look like just the beginning of the conversation. But here's what's actually interesting beyond the ghost story. Eto'o's purchase of Villa Alta fits into a broader and genuinely significant pattern of elite black athletes acquiring centuries-old European legacy properties, places that require millions in restoration and position the owner not as a buyer, but as a custodian. That's a different relationship with wealth and history than buying a glass and steel penthouse in a new development. It says, I'm not just moving into Europe's luxury market. I'm taking responsibility for a piece of it. Rank number 3, Lewis Hamilton, the man who owns a piece of every city that matters. Lewis Hamilton's real estate portfolio doesn't follow the logic of any single property or any single location. It follows the logic of his entire life, which has been spent moving between cities, time zones, and chapters at a pace that most people can't track from the outside. The result is a collection of properties estimated at over $250 million in total value, spread across Monaco, London, Milan, and Switzerland, each one solving a specific problem in his life rather than simply existing as a status marker. Start with Monaco, because it's the center of gravity. His primary residence is a penthouse in the Fontvieille district, worth upwards of £30 million, with a sun terrace, a steam room, and panoramic views of the harbor that he has described as home, while also admitting it lacks the emotional memories of his other properties. Monaco makes sense for an F1 driver in the way it makes sense for almost no one else. Tax-free status, a peer group of fellow champions living within a few minutes' walk, Verstappen, Leclerc, the whole grid, and a geography that puts you on the Mediterranean while keeping you central to the European racing calendar. It's a very specific kind of address with a very specific kind of logic behind it. Then London, and this one has real weight to it. In 2017, Hamilton paid £18.2 million for a 6-bedroom, 6,500 square foot mansion in Kensington, built in 1860, previously owned by Burberry's Christopher Bailey. The garden runs 200 feet, which in the dense residential streets of West London is so rare it borders on absurd. 4 floors, 4 reception rooms, an entertainment space designed for high-profile gatherings. This is the property that holds the London chapter of his life, and the historical pedigree of the building gives it a permanence that a new build never could. And then, 2025 changed the equation. Hamilton's move to Ferrari brought Milan into the portfolio, specifically an apartment in Porta Nuova, Milan's answer to Canary Wharf, all glass towers and business infrastructure and forward momentum, which keeps him within reach of Ferrari's Maranello headquarters while planting him in Italy's fashion capital. For someone who has been as invested in fashion and design as Hamilton has been throughout his career, that's not incidental. The Swiss flat near Lake Geneva rounds it all out as the Alpine retreat, and taken together, you have a portfolio that covers every base: tax haven, historic capital, industrial hub, serene countryside. It's not a collection of properties, it's a mapped-out version of a very intentional life. Rank number 2, Isabel dos Santos, the Iceberg Mansions and the Continental Empire. Isabel dos Santos built one of the most geographically distributed real estate portfolios in Europe, and the full story of how she did it is the kind of thing that reads differently depending on which chapter you're in. Because by the end, a significant portion of it became the subject of one of the largest financial investigations in the history of African governance. Let's start with what she built, because the scale is genuinely extraordinary. In Monaco, her primary Mediterranean asset is a €50 million property in La Petite Afrique, one of the most prestigious buildings in the Principality, situated adjacent to the casino gardens with unobstructed Mediterranean views. The property was acquired through a Maltese holding company, which was how essentially all of her European real estate moved, through offshore vehicles layered in jurisdictions chosen specifically for their opacity. The Luanda Leaks investigation, when it came, revealed just how intricate that architecture was. In London, she and her late husband, Sindika Dokolo, owned 3 properties within a single gated development in Kensington, valued together at approximately £24 million. One of these received planning permission for an iceberg basement extension, the controversial construction technique where you excavate downward for multiple subterranean levels while leaving the historic exterior completely untouched, effectively tripling the usable living space invisibly. Below ground, swimming pools, spas, and storage for their collection of over 3,000 works of African art, which was itself one of the most significant private collections of its kind anywhere in the world. Then Portugal, which carries a specific historical logic, Angola's former colonial power serving as the primary entry point for Angolan capital into European markets. A luxury apartment in Lisbon on Avenue Antonio Augusto de Aguiar, with 7 dedicated parking spaces, which in the densely parked streets of the Portuguese capital is a meaningful signal of what the building offers. And then the Algarve, Villa Isabella at Quinta do Lago. 5 bedrooms, heated pool, games room, manicured grounds in one of Europe's most sought-after coastal resort communities. A property that was also periodically rented out to other high-net-worth individuals, generating further income back into the offshore structure. The investigation that followed ultimately froze significant portions of these assets, and Dos Santos' story has become inseparable from the broader conversation about how African wealth moves through European property markets. But the portfolio itself, before all of that, represented something genuinely remarkable. A continental real estate empire spanning 4 countries, assembled with a sophistication and a geographic range that almost no one at her level had managed before. Rank number 1. Folorunsho Alakija, the woman who bought multiple apartments in the most expensive building on Earth. There's a building in Knightsbridge called One Hyde Park, and it has a specific distinction that no other residential development in the world shares. It is, by price per square foot, and by the profile of the people who own units inside it, the most expensive apartment block on the planet. Ukrainian oligarchs, Middle Eastern royalty, global pop stars, the kind of names that don't end up in property records unless their lawyers have been very careless. Folorunsho Alakija owns between 3 and 5 apartments in it. Combined acquisition cost, approximately $123 million. Let that number sit for a moment. Not one apartment. Multiple apartments. In the single most expensive building in the world. Purchased through Rose of Sharon 4, a company registered in the Isle of Man because at this tier of wealth, the transaction structure is as carefully engineered as the property itself. And the Isle of Man registration keeps the acquisition in a tax-neutral jurisdiction appropriate for the scale of the asset. Alakija's wealth originates from Famfa Oil and her Rose of Sharon group, built in Nigeria across decades of work in oil exploration and the fashion industry before that. She's been listed among the wealthiest black women in the world and remains one of the most significant Nigerian businesswomen of her generation. And while she continues to live primarily in Lagos, in the Rose of Sharon Towers, her waterfront compound on Victoria Island, her London holdings represent something specific and deliberate, a permanent anchor for her family's wealth in the most stable, prestigious asset class available anywhere in the world. One Hyde Park's amenities deserve their own accounting, because they operate on a level that most luxury buildings don't approach. Security is handled by former SAS personnel. The building features iris recognition technology at entry points and bulletproof glass is standard. Panic rooms, a direct link to the adjacent Mandarin Oriental Hotel for 24-hour room service and full spa access. Private cinema. Interiors managed by Candy & Candy, mirrors that convert to television screens, bronze fins that provide privacy without obstructing light, finishes calibrated at £6,000 per square foot. The social reality of owning multiple units in this building is its own dimension. There's a version of wealth that operates by proximity, where the people you're in a building with are as important as the building itself, and where the address opens doors that no amount of net worth alone would unlock. For a black woman from Lagos to hold a significant stake in that specific building, in that specific postcode, at that specific price point, it is by any reasonable measure the most powerful real estate statement on this entire list, which is exactly why it's number 1. And here you are, 8 billionaires with 8 wild stories about their residences. Which one impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments. And for more such interesting peeks into how black wealth is prospering across the globe, take a look at Black Status.